Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, Dave and I will be opening up the mailbag and answering your user generated questions. All that and more. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in Bills Mafia to another edition of the Air Raid Hour presented by Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. Tonight, Dave, we are going to answer user submitted questions from people on social media. I put out the bat signal this week. I asked people on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it. And I asked them, hey, what topics, what questions do you guys want us to talk about in this mailbag episode that maybe if it goes well, we might make a weekly thing here every Thursday at 9 p.m. But I put out the bat signal. I got some really exciting questions and topics. I can't wait to get into them tonight. And I know you're going in blind. You didn't want to know what the questions were.
Did not want to know.
Before, so you're going to be going off the cuff. I had a little bit of time to prepare. You're still probably going to sound better than me answering half these questions, but let's get right.
I like being put on the hot seat, man. But remember the old Budweiser hot seat they had on ESPN? Yeah, that was good.
So let's get right into it. Let's start with a question submitted by Seabass on Twitter. He says, how many yards are acceptable for Keon Coleman in year one? The expectations for Keon Coleman, that is a hot button topic, I think, right now in Bills Mafia. What do you think is an acceptable yardage total for Keon Coleman in year one?
It's interesting, right? You take a look at the breakdown from last year. Diggs led the way with 1183. Gabe Davis, 746, was second on the team. Dalton Kincaid, 673. At the end of it all, Josh Allen had just about 4,300 passing yards. I mean, look, this offense is going to be interesting, right? We're going to have to try to find these yards somewhere. I don't know that this is necessarily going to be a 4,500 passing yard season for Josh Allen. I could be wrong, but I could see him kind of dipping maybe down closer to 4,000 this year. All of those Gabriel Davis yards obviously aren't going to go to him, but you also have 1,100, almost 1,200 yards that have to get put somewhere. Maybe if it's not 1,200, maybe like 900 to 1,000 from Stephon Diggs going somewhere. Kincaid's going to soak up a lot of that. Samuel's going to soak up a lot of that. You expect Shahir to soak up some of that. Coleman will get his chances. Honestly, I think 400 to 500 yards is acceptable for me in year one. Some people are going to, and again, I'm off the cuff here, but I think some people are going to flame me for that. But I think that's reasonable. And I think that actually is pretty decent expectation, right? Kincaid last year with all people, a good season, obviously different position, only 673 yards at the tight end position. I think 500 is a good and acceptable year one for Coleman.
Yeah, you mentioned all the names that are going to be getting targets and yards that could possibly be in front of Keon Coleman. I think it's a little unrealistic to think he's going to step in. By a little, I mean a lot unrealistic for him to step in and fill the shoes of Stephon Diggs season number one. I think it's probably unrealistic to expect him to be, fourth year, third year Gabe Davis in year one. Yes, he was the 33rd overall pick in the draft. Yes, he was a high draft pick on a wide receiver needy team looking to fill a lot of targets. But that being said, he's also just turned 21 years old, right? He's one of the younger prospects in the draft as well. The Buffalo Bills really I can envision them slow playing Keon Coleman, but that doesn't mean he's not going to play a vital role. I mean, if he gets somewhere between 400 and 700 yards, but gives you 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdowns, right? He starts off slow, but he starts to really pick up steam down the stretch and have some big games for you down the stretch and sets himself up for an even bigger year two and then year three. And then, by year four, when his contract is up, he's still only 24 years old. You can pay him and know you're going to get his prime years. So I think there is a hope that Keon Coleman is going to slowly progress. I don't think he's going to be some bad out of hell type of prospect. So I'm right there with you. Somewhere between 4 and 800 yards. The touchdowns mean more to me. I would
Yep.
like to see him be a legitimate red zone threat from year one. That be his sort of niche, and be a guy who has 7, 8, 9, fingers crossed, 10 touchdown grabs in his rookie season.
Yeah, and so glad you're kind of with me on that because I was like, not sure how. I mean,
Yeah.
people are probably going to have unrealistic expectations for him.
Mhm.
Let's
No,
be
there's no
honest.
way anyone's ever going to have unrealistic expectations for anybody.
Yeah.
Um, this was a great question from Alan Enjoyer, Matthew Rose, our guy Matthew Rose. He literally just wrote the receiver room. And obviously this is more of a topic than a question, but it really made me think about an appearance that Brandon Bean made on Chris Long's podcast last week.
Mm,
And Chris Long said, like, everyone thinks your wide receiver room got worse. Your receiver room got worse. He's like, Chris Long was like, I don't see that. Like, there's a lot of talented players. Like, and he asked Brandon Bean, like, what's that wide receiver room gonna shake out? What's it gonna look like? And the first thing he pointed out in the conversation was Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. He says, listen, we got two really talented tight ends, and they're
mhm,
allowed to catch the ball too. The Bills had a lot of success in 12 personnel last season, or in spurts had success in 12 personnel last season. You could see a lot more of that. You could see a lot more targets go to Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. And you saw in the Pittsburgh playoff game that you can spread the wealth between the two guys. They both caught
mhm,
touchdowns in that game. He never mentioned the running back specifically, but you have James Cook, a pass catching back. You got Ray Davis, a pass catching back. We saw Ty Johnson catch the ball out of the backfield as well. And then what I really thought was interesting from Brandon Bean was he labeled his top 5 receivers. He gave them sort of roles. Now, it was layman's terms and it was a summary, and a lot of it was stating the obvious, but he was like, listen, we have a wide receiver by committee. He didn't use those words, I'm summarizing, but we got guys who can do a bunch of different things. He said Marquez Valdez Scantling, he's our field stretcher. He used that word, field stretcher. He said Shakir and Samuel, they're our rack guys, run after catch type of guys. Keon Coleman, he used the word X, right? I think he means it more as a go up and get it type of big body boundary receiver, more so than he does 180 target like X. I think he meant it more in that regard. But he said Keon Coleman was the X. And then he called Mac Hollins the glue guy, said he loved the way Mac Hollins approached the game, and stated that Mac Hollins could have a pretty decent role because he's never played for a quarterback as good as Josh Allen. So maybe Mac Hollins could be more of a threat than originally thought. I think what was notable was that he gave each sort of a niche role. And I think that what was notable was the 5 guys he listed. He didn't mention Justin Shorter. He didn't mention Chase Claypool. He didn't mention KJ Hamler. Those are the 5 dudes that he mentioned. So if we're looking at purely the receiver room, it's those 5 guys and then the field. And I think we're still understating and underselling the role of the tight ends and the running backs in this offense this year.
and you start to think about you add the tight ends to that list and you add the running backs as pass catchers out of the backfields, you're at 7, 8 guys now that need to get targets. And it's going to be a different looking offense this year, I would have to imagine, with Joe Brady. Like, you're not going to have a guy, I don't think, that's going to get 160 targets. Like, you, people want Dalton Kincaid to be that guy, but I don't think he's going to be, right? I think you're
Mm,
going to see a lot more distribution of the targets evenly spread out. I think that you're going to see a lot of guys contribute into that 600 to 800 yard range. I think you're going to see a lot of the catch totals be a little bit more evenly distributed, but that's under the sort of premise that Joe Brady is going to figure out how he can make this all work with all of these guys that on paper look like they do complement each other pretty well skill set wise. Yes, you don't necessarily have that superstar alpha guy in the room,
mm,
but you do have a nice complement of skill sets on the table for at your disposal if you're Joe Brady. So to me, that's maybe one of the underrated storylines going into the season and going into training camp is how is Joe Brady going to use this allotment of guys that have a varying skill set, on the table with 7 to 8 deep that of guys that could legitimately get targets. So, yes, I can understand why people from the outside would look and say like this is not a great room, but I also think it is a pretty deep room
Mhm.
top to bottom when you start to include the tight ends as well. A lot of guys who are capable. So we'll see kind of how Joe Brady can maneuver with this group.
The next topic from a name that I know from back from our Buffalo Fanatics days, Adam Nanini. He comes in and he just had a statement: the hate of Justin Shorter. And that sort of made me think, when you go onto social media, Justin Shorter is a lightning rod, because there is one group of people that are like really bullish on Justin Shorter. Man, you are not giving Justin Shorter enough credit. He was hurt last year. He's going to break out this year. He's going to be a threat for the Buffalo Bills. You're sleeping on him. This, and this. Like, there are like the stands of Justin Shorter. And then there's the complete other opposite of the end of people who are like, stop talking about Justin Shorter. Like, he's nothing. Like, he's bottom of the roster fodder. He's not going to make the team, like, et cetera. There's really like no middle ground. And I feel like that's where the conversation for Justin Shorter should be, because to me, I'm looking at Justin Shorter like, hey, I hope the Buffalo Bills have like maybe a slightly upgradable version of Jake Kumerow on their hands here.
Yep.
A guy who can play
Good
4 phases
example.
of special teams.
Good example. Yeah.
And a guy who, like, once or twice a year can fill in if one of our boundary guys goes down. That's all I'm looking for in Justin Shorter. And I feel like that's where the conversation about Justin Shorter should be.
Yeah, and I feel like we have this conversation, whether it's with Jake Kumerow or Justin Shorter or whoever that sixth guy, seventh guy is on the Bills roster that makes this team as the last wide receiver. Like, the offensive contributions are essentially going to be zero, right? I mean, like, last year it was Trent Sherfield was that guy, and he had 11 catches on the season, right? I mean, like, and some of that was he was forced into action with some injuries late in the year, right? In Miami game and others. So it's like the expectations just need to be realistic around Justin Shorter. Like, he can be a sixth receiver on your roster. He can be a good special teamer. He can be a guy that at spots maybe contributes minimally on offense, but I think anything above that is beyond expectations, at least of what I have of him right now. It's not hate. It's just the realistic expectation of what you should have for a guy that's your sixth, seventh receiver. And by the way, a guy that there isn't a guarantee that he's going to make this team. If like Brandon Beane really wants that last guy to be a special teams ace, he might prefer a guy like Tyrell Shavers, who had that ability in college. So it's not hate. It's just Justin Shorter is not the next coming of Jerry Rice, right? Like, it's just like that's not what he like. If he comes out and like, what do people think he's going to come out and like all of a sudden be better than what Gabriel Davis was for this team? That's what some people I think he can be, but like I just don't see it. It's not hate. It's just realism. That's all it is.
According to most draft consensus boards of like people in the draft Twitter community, the Bills passed on better wide receivers in the 5th round last year, better pure wide receivers. They passed on Puka Nacua. They passed on Trey Palmer. They passed on our guy Xavier Hutchinson, who's might be on his way out in Houston because of how stacked they are.
Stacked. Yeah.
A lot of better pure receivers than Justin Shorter were passed on by the Buffalo Bills. And Brandon Beane essentially said, like, we think it's because Justin Shorter's special teams abilities give him a chance to earn a jersey. So Brandon Beane himself came out and said, like, we drafted this dude because he's a special teamer. So thinking, as you mentioned, that like he could be a souped up or better version, an upgraded version of Gabe Davis, I think that might be a little crazy in terms of expectations. All right, before we get to our next topic, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And we can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right. Our next question comes from David Bell at David B Bell 1 on Twitter/X. He says, who do you think will lead the Bills in sacks in the year 2024? What is your take here, Dave?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna say Ed Oliver. Like, I just don't have a better answer than that. I just
Yeah.
9.5 sacks last year. Von Miller, I kind of have like very low expectations for him this year. I think 6 to 8 sacks from Von Miller would be like honestly a
Sure.
success
I'll take
for
that.
him. I think AJ Epinesa will be right around that 6.5, 7 mark that he was at last year. I think Rousseau will be around that 5, 6 mark. Because he's not necessarily that sort of pass rushing guy. He's kind of like that cleanup guy. He had 5 sacks last year. I mean, Terrell Bernard and L. Oliver could be your team leaders in sacks this year, honestly, at
Yeah.
the end of the day. So I'm gonna go out and say Ed Oliver, who
Yeah.
was a half a sack away from 10 sacks last year.
Yeah, this is. I'm going to try to be different from you, but I'm with you. I think the chalk answer here is at Oliver because he's got that proven production from last year. He is certainly the most talented player on that defensive line. But at the end of the day, I think opponents are going to know that and they're going to maybe scheme to that. But I think that the pressure that at Oliver creates on the interior, I think the pressure that Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard have blitzing the A gap and all the various things that they do, I think that will lead to a cleanup sack fest between Gregory Rousseau and AJ Epinesa. So I will say those two guys will be pushing 10 sacks this year, each of them, Epinesa and Rousseau. A
I
majority
would
of
like
them, I
that.
think, a majority of them, I think, will be cleanup sacks from interior disruptions. So I'm not saying that the either of these guys are these polished, bendy, elite NFL pass rushers. But I do think they are going to benefit from the interior disruption. And I do think that both of them are going to have career seasons because they're finally healthy. I think they're finally each ready to hit their ceiling. So either Rousseau or Epinesa, I think one of those two will lead the Buffalo Bills in sacks in 2024. Our man Bills Are Electric comes in and says, do you think Brandon Beane is done adding to the safety room? And the intrigue here comes from Micah Hyde, who had his charity softball game this past Sunday. In the press conference leading up to the softball game, he said, I have two choices. I'm either going to come back and play for the Buffalo Bills or I'm going to retire. And then as he was giving his speech to the crowd, Josh Allen comes up, steals the microphone, and starts a one more year chant to try to coax Micah Hyde back to the Buffalo Bills. We've mentioned there's a missing trait in this safety room for the Buffalo Bills that is still missing despite all the additions they have made to this room. Do you think Beane is done here and the guys that we have on the roster currently are the guys, or could we see maybe a former Buffalo Bill become a Buffalo Bill once again?
Well, it'd be interesting to know the timing of when this question was collected because we did sign D Delaney right recently. So if that question came in before, then that's a nice question by Bills Electric. I will say this: if Micah Hyde calls up Brandon Beane and says, "Look, I want to try to come back," I think Brandon Beane would find a way, right, to get him back, whether that's cutting D Delaney or someone else on the team. Probably Delaney. I don't know what kind of contract he got. I can't imagine there was much in the way of guarantees for him, if any. So, um, adding, I think he's done, but replacing, I could see Micah Hyde replacing D Delaney on this roster if
Yeah.
he came back and said, "Hey, I want one more shot at it."
Yeah, my previous take before the MVS signing and stuff was like, if the Bills are going to add another guy in free agency, I would love it to be Justin Simmons because we're missing that center fielding aspect. I think if the Bills do add, I think it's going to be Micah Hyde. Maybe Micah Hyde is one of those guys where they're like, hey, we'll call you in November if we need you, right? Like stay in shape, keep grinding, stay local or stay around. If some injuries occur to our room, if things don't work out like we expect with the guys, like be by the phone, Micah Hyde. Like maybe we might
Yeah,
need you
I
in
can see that.
October, November. So it might not occur before September, but maybe a mid-season Micah Hyde edition could occur. Another safety related question comes in from Lee Kenneth. You can find him on X at GoBills8672. This is a question we've sort of we've pondered previously on the show. Thoughts on who the two safeties you think will be starting in week 1?
Ooh, week 1? I think week 1, it might be Rapp and Edwards, but I do
Mhm.
think pretty early on in the season, I don't know how early on, but I do think at some point it's gonna be Cole Bishop and Edwards will be your 2 that you'd want on the
Mhm.
field most often. Now, I do think they're gonna use Taylor Rapp. I mean, they're certainly paying him like they're gonna use him, and they're paying him as like a pseudo starter, it seems like starter money. So it wouldn't surprise me if you see situations where Rapp, Bishop, and Edwards are all in the field at times. And we saw that last year with Rapp, Poyer, and Hyde. We contemplated why they had signed Taylor Rapp, and we thought that they would like to use him in certain situations. I could see that being the case. I think if I'm betting on it right now, week 1 would be Rapp and Edwards. However, I do think
Mhm.
ultimately the vision, at least for 2024 beyond week 1, maybe early into the season, would be Bishop and Edwards.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there, like, complete agreement. I think the Bills are gonna try to find a way to get Cole Bishop on the field early too, even though he's not starting, and then he could be like a Milano over Ramon Humber, like, mid-season type of swap in the safety room, changing the guards in the safety room. I think Eric Turner in the Cover One group chat has sort of shown us the path of like how
Mhm,
what that would look like. Hey, if Matt Milano is slow coming back from, his injury, maybe you take Matt Milano early in the season off the field on 3rd down and you go back into those dime packages we saw last year, and Taylor Rapp goes back into the role he played and Cole Bishop takes the safety spot, or Cole Bishop goes into that Taylor Rapp slot and Taylor Rapp stays in the Jordan Poyer slot. Like, maybe the Buffalo Bills early in the season operate a 3
yep,
safety defense on passing downs because Matt Milano is still working his way back from that fractured leg. So I think Eric did a great job sort of painting that picture of how you could see 3 dudes really make a
mhm,
significant contribution early on in the season. I really like this next question here from Justin Hawks. You can find him on X at Justin Hawks. He said, Bean took his medicine this draft. I think what he means is the Bills traded back. They collected some picks. He didn't get super aggressive like he has in years previous. Do you expect him to be super aggressive in next year's draft when the Buffalo Bills should have a lot of draft capital to work with as well?
yeah, and then part of this taking his medicine was collecting that second round pick from the
Mhm.
Vikings via Houston, right, in the Stephon Diggs trade. Also collecting that extra 4th round pick from the Bears in the trade down, which ultimately netted them Ray Davis. So I think that Brandon Beane is putting himself in position with obviously getting that cap space freed up with Stephon Diggs not being on the cap in 25, redoing sort of or giving the pay cut situation with Von Miller. Like, Brandon Beane's putting himself in a position where 2025 is ideally like kind of an opposite of
Mhm.
2024, where like 2024 pretty conservative. Yes, he went out and signed Curtis Samuel, but 2025 maybe puts you in a position to be aggressive in free agency and aggressive in the draft to really load up this roster in 2025. So super aggressive. We've seen him be aggressive in the first round before. That's more of his MO than trading down.
Mhm.
Now, he was patient this year. He traded down, got Coleman. That I think is not his MO. I think he wants to get his guys. Now we'll see kind of what the needs the Bills have after free agency next year, but it certainly put them in a position where if they wanted to make a significant move up, presuming they're still picking in the high
Mhm.
20s or 30s, they have the ammo to do so now if they really want to.
I'm sort of going to flip this statement on its head because I don't even know if Bean took his medicine. I just think that this was like a scenario where it was just like there was just nothing he could do. Like, nothing feasibly made sense. I think if there was a feasible thing that made sense for him to move up for Brian Thomas Jr., I think he would have done it. If there was a
Mhm.
way for him to move up for Romo Dunes, I think he would have done it. If there was a way for him to move up for like Letty Latu and the medicals checked out, I think he would have done it. Like, I don't know if he was dead set on like taking his medicine. I just think that's the way that the chips fell this year.
Mhm. Yep.
I think every year Brandon Beane is going to try to be super aggressive because he understands that the Buffalo Bills are in, a window. The window is Josh Allen's career. He understands that the blue chip talent is not going to be there at the end of the first round. If you want the blue chip players, you got to go up and get the blue chip players. You've seen him move up time after time after time in the first round. So I think whether it's 2025 or 2026 or 2027, like whenever the opportunity to present itself to go get a blue chip player with that's reasonable, right? That's not selling the farm or getting ripped off in a trade value chart, whatever. I think Brandon Beane's always going to take that. I think he's always going to. I just think he didn't have an opportunity to take that this year because it just wasn't presented to him, or at least there wasn't a player he felt dropped to a position. But I think he'll always be aggressive in the draft. Darren Mitchell comes in and he says, do you think Brandon Beane makes any more additions? Edge, cornerback, safety, post 6-1. It'll be interesting. We added Marquez Valdez-Scantling. We got to sign our draft picks. Who even knows what things are going to look like money-wise? We sort of already talked about Micah Hyde and his possibility of joining the Bills. Justin Simmons might be out of our price range. And we gave Dwayne Smoot 4 void years to convince him to come here on the contract that he did. So we're paying Smoot for the next 4 years, even though he will only be a Buffalo Bill for likely one of them unless he gets extended after this season. I find it very hard outside of Micah Hyde to envision the Bills making any major move before September. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think safety is the play if they really wanted to. Maybe there's an outside chance they look at the corner market. There's some decent ones still out there. As Greg Thompson pointed out in the group Cover One group chat, there's some decent cornerback names out there right now. And but at the end of the day, the Bills may feel like, look, we need to see what we can get out of Kaiir Elam, whether or not he's got a path to maybe be a future starter in 2025. If Rasul Douglas is no longer with the team because he hasn't gotten that extension, what is that cornerback room going to look like? I don't think signing a guy post 6-1 does much to your future as far as the cornerback room, but maybe gives you a little bit of stability for 2024. I could see that being as an outside possibility. Maybe a corner gets added to the mix. So I kind of like where Darren's head's at here. These are 3 positions where I could still see there being a bit of a need, but I just think with edge, you mentioned with Smoot, like, are you going to put someone in, try to maybe stunt some growth of Javon Solomon, who's your draft pick? Like, I just don't know. I think edge is probably the least likely of these 3. I think Micah Hyde is probably the most likely, and then corner I'll put as a second place out of these 3.
Yeah, corner is interesting. I'll tell you what, like as a fan, I really want to see it be Kaiir Elam and Jamarcus Ingram. I want to see sort of that youth movement there at the depth of the position. If Rasul Douglas or Christian Benford, knock on wood, go down, I would love to see Kaiir Elam get an opportunity to go out there. And if he plays well, and the chances are, all things considered, if no additions are made to the roster and Kaiir Elam is cornerback number 3, just based on history, he's going to start some games this year, or he's going to come in and have to play 2-3 quarters in a lot of games this year because it just seems to happen every year. And that's a legitimate opportunity for him to, with a new coaching staff on defense and guys shuffled around, new faces at least, is a chance for him to possibly make his case to be the starter opposite Christian Benford in 2025.
Right.
And there's a case for Jamarcus Ingram to be a very low cost, like Dane Jackson-y type of depth piece, which is really exciting as well. But at the end of the day, it's really exciting on paper. There's the reality of what actually happens on the field if those guys have to step onto it. And I've also seen a couple of 53-man roster projections with Kenny H. Lovely making the team. So
he's becoming a cult favorite.
Him and the punter, whose name I will not remember until training
Browning,
camp.
I think.
Browning.
Right? Yeah, I think it's Browning.
I love Bills Mafia, and I'm calling out a couple of our fellow Cover One people here, but like on a team as good as the Buffalo Bills, projecting UDFAs to make the 53-man roster in May, like what? I love you guys. I'm not going to name names. They're people I love, but like, what are we doing here? Talk to me in August when they've done something that we can visually see worth a damn before we put them onto the. I know they're just having fun and it means nothing, but Let's see something a little bit from these guys first. All right. The next question here is from it's Ian Laird. And I want you, Dave, to try to answer this question for each. One sentence each, like a summarized answer. What's maybe one reason to be worried this season as a Bills fan and one reason not to be worried as a Bills fan?
Well, I think one reason to worry is, as we talked about on our show on Monday, the schedule looks pretty daunting. And I know,
Mhm.
like, it is what it is until the season starts, and then things kind of materialize. We figure out which teams are better than we thought, which teams are worse, whatever. But the schedule does look, opponent wise, pretty daunting. I don't think the travel or like the rest or anything like that is an issue. I'm not saying that, but I do think going to Detroit, going to LA, playing the Jets, with a presumed healthy Aaron Rodgers twice now with a really good roster, playing the Chiefs, playing the 49ers, playing what should be an up and coming Colts team. I think the schedule's tough, and I think it's going to be it's going to be a tough road to win the division this year. I think they still do it, but I do think it's a tough road to win the division this year. The reason not to worry is because of who you have at quarterback, right? You have Josh Allen, and in any given game, that guy can take over and he can win a game for you. There's
Mhm.
never going to be a game where the Bills are going to be considered out of it. There's never going to be a game going in where you think they can't win. So
Mhm.
the number one reason really for this entire organization and entire season coming up to not worry is Josh Allen.
I literally have the same exact answer. Yeah, I wouldn't change a thing. The reason to worry, really tough schedule. The reason not to worry, Josh Allen is your quarterback. All right, final question of the evening here. Probably the most pointed question here. Probably the best question anyone could possibly ask. Comes
I'll ask.
from a guy on Twitter here at Judge Mathis. He says, this was mostly me having a take that I want to get off my chest, but I'm going to give you an opportunity first. Are there any Bills takes you are looking to get off your chest? Anything just sitting in the hamper you're ready to get out there, project upon the world?
It kind of goes back to my kind of draft take of like let people like have their opinions. Like I'm so over like everyone jumping down everyone else's throat about like, oh, you're so wrong, or like when people like, I get it. It's that time of the year. It's a summer.
Mhm.
There's not a whole lot going on movement wise in the roster. There's not like a ton going on action wise on the field. But man, like let's wait till training camp before we start yelling at each other. Can we please be a little bit more civil when we deal with each other online? That's all I'm asking. Let's be a little more civil.
Well, now I gotta be nice about my take. I can't be jumping down people's throats. But my take that I want to get off my chest is I think that people, and again, I respect everyone's opinion. You can have your own opinion, right? Because I have to preface that now that that's your take. But I think people are too high on Lyle Collins,
Yeah,
right?
I can
Like,
see that. I agree.
I,
I agree.
the guy hasn't played in like 2 years, like hasn't been good in three. Like I saw our guy Uber make a 53-man roster projection. He cut Alec Anderson. So like to me, I know we added Lyle Collins. I know we re-signed David Edwards. I know that we drafted Cedric Van Pran Granger and Tillin Grable. But I feel like as Bills fans, we can't sleep on the guys who we've been developing on this
Yep.
roster on the offensive line. I think that Alec Anderson, I think the first day of training camp, you're going to see Alec Anderson and David Edwards competing at left guard to start. Like I think Alec Anderson is in competition to start at left guard. I could be wrong, and we could get to July, and he's just a backup. But I think he's going to take first team reps the first week of training camp. Whether that holds throughout all of training camp, who knows? But I think Alec Anderson will get an opportunity. The Buffalo Bills didn't carry him on their practice squad for a full year, and then redshirt him on their active roster for a whole year just to cut him and try to put him on the practice squad this year. Like they just didn't, right? And you could make that same argument maybe for Kingsley Jonathan, but we added a lot of bodies there. Um, and then another guy who I think could be on the Alec Anderson track is Richard Garage. I think he's a guy, Richard Garage. He could be a guy who was on the practice squad this year. And I wouldn't be shocked if he makes the team over Lyle Collins this year. If Lyle Collins doesn't like win the left guard job or doesn't show that he's like the dude behind Spencer Brown, if it was a flyer and they wanted to take a look at Lyle Collins and he just wasn't what they thought what he was, right? Richard Garage could be a guy that steps in and takes that 9th or 10th offensive line spot if the Buffalo Bills decide to keep that many offensive linemen. So don't sleep on the guys the Bills have had in the building. Don't sleep on Alec Anderson. Don't sleep on Richard Garage. The Tillin Grable stuff, I think he's a year away. I think you can safely put him on the practice squad unless he really blows up at camp and you want to keep him as your 9th or 10th guy. I think he's more likely to get cut than the two UDFA guys and Alec Anderson and Richard Garage, because I think that year under Aaron Kromer, that year in the system, I think that means something. I really do. So don't sleep on those two guys.
I like Alec Anderson a lot, and I think that you've invested so much more in him, time, coaching. It's not just about the money, right? Like, you've invested time and coaching in this guy for multiple years now. So La'el Collins was like obviously not like highly sought after in free agency because the Bills got him in like the 3rd, 4th wave of free agency right before the draft. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I agree with that take.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll be back next Monday. Our theme next week is going to be contract year players. So I'm not exactly sure because I haven't started the show notes yet. Maybe we'll get through all the contract year players on one show on Monday night. Maybe it might have to be an offensive, defensive type of thing, but we're going to take a look at all the Buffalo Bills players whose contracts are inspiring after next season. Talk about who do the Buffalo Bills need to extend, who might not be a part of the Buffalo Bills future 2025 and beyond. So that's the conversation we will have next week. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. And I mean, one guy that immediately comes to mind, Rasul Douglas. I think he's going to be on a lot of people's minds. And look, it just comes down, I think, to how do you feel about the prospects of Kyrie Elam and Jamarcus Ingram potentially beyond or even in 2024. So that'll be an interesting player to talk about.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, if you didn't know, you can also listen to this podcast in audio-only form on any major podcasting platform. Just head over to your favorite podcasting app, type in Air Raid Buffalo, and you can listen. These Thursday shows actually premiere before the video. So Thursday morning, you can go to your podcasting platform of choice and you can listen to the episode that you're listening to or watching right now on YouTube. And as always, smash that like button. We always appreciate that. And any shares, people you might know that want to join this Air Raid Hour community that we got going here at Cover One, just click that copy link button, send them the show. We really would appreciate it. Thank you so much. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!